I think we all realise that the money involved in football has gone way overboard and something needs to change. So, maybe a salary cap?
The Premier League is one of the UK's most successful exports, but when it comes to actually making money, its clubs are less so. When Chelsea played Manchester City in the Champions League final in May, the match featured the two clubs that had made the highest pre-tax losses in Premier League history.
Oh, that's a lot.
Between them, Chelsea and City had lost over £1.5 billion, a price worth paying if you look in the trophy cabinet. But according to some, such spending reduces the sustainability of the domestic game as others play catch-up. The present profitability and sustainability rules, which most fans still refer to as financial fair play, is a break-even model. Clubs are allowed to lose £15 million pre-tax over a rolling 3-year period. However, certain costs, academy, community, women's team, infrastructure, are excluded, and owners are allowed to contribute via share issues a further £90 million over that 3-year period. So these rules do have some merit. But one of the flaws is that they are based on historic published financial accounts, which are not published until well after the end of the season. This means that if the Premier League does apply any sanctions, they are always after the event.
I think that's similar in most situations, though, isn't it, really? Because I don't know about the Saracens incident in rugby where they got relegated, but you can't punish something until after it's happened because you don't know it's happened.
Trophies, Champions League places and relegation will have been determined already. So an alternative is some form of spending cap. A hard cap, where there is a total wage limit that is the same for each club, is unworkable in the Premier League, where the range of the wage table is more than £250 million.
It's a very tricky one with a salary cap in that sense because it's all well and good putting just as a round number saying £1 million you're allowed to spend on a salary. The top clubs who've got all the money can certainly fill that out, but the bottom clubs, well, they'll still be in the same situation. They still won't be able to offer that sort of money, and therefore they still won't get the top players. I get that. That's understandable, and that makes sense. But these clubs complaining that they're running out of money, and then the media rights aren't making enough money for them. But then how do you say Ronaldo and Messi on Neymar on these stupid wages, crazy wages? How do you then say, okay, well, there's a salary cap and it's actually you can't go less than what they're on, surely, because they won't be happy. You can't all of a sudden start paying them less. How do you get around it? I really don't know.
Also, due to the Premier League elite seeing their competitors as the other big clubs in Europe rather than the small but reasonably established sides at home. A cap set at 20% over the average Premier League wage bill would give a figure of £193 million, which would only really affect 5 clubs. These clubs might legitimately claim that they were being held back on the European stage by such a policy and could easily afford to pay more. So the alternative is a soft cap, with wages linked to revenues. The Premier League's revenues were distorted in 2019-20, so a look at the figures for the season before shows that 7 clubs in 2018-19 were over the line, none of whom would have been impacted by the hard cap limit.
This is so frustrating though, because Southampton, the team I support, is up there doing okay in wages, and we're not buying any players that are any good. Or we sort of did this year, I suppose, but it's just a typical football fan moaning about the owners, I suppose.
However, wage caps ignore the impact of transfer fees on clubs. Players signed on Bosman deals are usually able to command higher wages as clubs look at the total cost of recruiting a player, which is both wages and amortisation, transfer fee spread over contract life. Therefore, there is a case for taking transfer costs into consideration too. In La Liga, the economic cost control measures that operate there are forward-based. Clubs have to submit estimated figures for both their revenue, including player sales, and costs, including player purchases. La Liga's team of spreadsheet experts then analyse the estimates for reasonableness, looking at transfer values in the present market, for example. La Liga then gives the club a total sum that they can spend during the following season, but allows the clubs to allocate this between transfers and wages as they see fit.
That's really interesting. But it's almost relying on an outside body to tell you how much you're allowed to spend. And actually it sort of makes sense, but once again, is it going to reduce how good your team is on the European stage, for example, if other leagues are able to do something and you're not? However, transfers is just as important as wages, i.e. they have spiraled out of control. You know, I understand there's inflation and all that, and that's fine, but it's well over inflation. 100 million for a player, for example, that's crazy. You know, and the problem is with no transfer cap, for example, you know, if one club offers 1 million, but another offers 2 million, you know, if you want that player, you're going to have to then offer 3 million, and then that after 4 million. So it goes up and up and up, and it will never end. It really will not ever end. So, you know, transfers are also just as important as the wage caps, for sure.
The formula used to determine the actual budget is a secret, but the main elements involve 4 financial metrics. Economic profitability, ordinary profit before tax divided by total assets, financial profitability, ordinary profit before tax divided by equity, general liquidity, current assets divided by liquid liabilities, and solvency, equity divided by total assets.
This video, by the way, is a little bit of a tricky one to not necessarily to understand, but to take all of it in. It's quite wordy for sure.
Where La Liga rules show their teeth is that clubs have to register their players using an app as they are signed. If the wages and transfer fee result in the club exceeding the allowed limit, the app flashes red. This means that the club either have to reduce wages with existing squad members and/or sell a player so that the new recruit can be registered to play for the forthcoming season. So would this work?
How interesting is that? That's really interesting. And the only problem is, how good would you say the Spanish league is compared to, for example, the Premier League, where there's no real restrictions?
In the Premier League? Well, it would require a vote to take place and a 2/3 majority to vote in favour. Whether clubs with ultra-high net worth owners such as Chelsea, Manchester City, Aston Villa or Everton would be keen to have such controls is uncertain. But if an independent football regulator is introduced as a result of the current situation, then this issue may be taken out of their hands and could be imposed. The Athletic has looked at the accounts of the 20 clubs who will form the Premier League in 2021-22 and has applied a much simpler version of the formula used by La Liga above to see the potential budgets that clubs would face in the forthcoming season.
Let's just have a quick look at that. Man United, yeah, the top ones are up there. Amazingly, Spurs are in 4th there. It's crazy to see Southampton sort of just above the mid-table. That is really sort of where we should finish. Brentford are right up there, wow. But Everton right at the bottom. That's crazy. They would not be able to spend a lot. They would not be able to spend a lot at all. Yeah, that could almost... The problem is that could almost ruin them. If Everton was, were only allowed to spend that much, that could ruin them. This would be the only issue, isn't it? It's still almost allowing those big clubs to be big, and it's sort of restricting then the other lower teams, isn't it? It's restrictive to them. So, what do you do?
On the basis of these calculations, the Premier League spend on wages and transfers would fall by about £430 million compared to the most recent accounts for 2019-20. Those clubs that have had historic good control over costs would be rewarded, and the Big Six would still enjoy a substantial financial advantage over the other clubs.
Tottenham, the Big Six. Arsenal, the Big Six. That's laughable these days.
At the bottom end of the table, the sight of Everton might initially surprise. But the club has spent a lot in recent seasons, and this has resulted in high wages and amortisation fees, which would result in a tighter budget for 2021-22. There would have to be a transition period in which clubs would adjust their spending behaviour to avoid having to face that cliff-face fall in spending. Such a scheme might also be seen as a disincentive for ambitious owners such as Farhad Moshiri at Everton and Wes Edens and Nassef Sawiris at Villa. And further fear among critics is that introducing such rules into the Premier League would further entrench existing financial advantages.
That was the point I just made, wasn't it? that those big six, they're still able to spend a hell of a lot more than anyone else. At least, I assume at least at the moment, for example, Southampton, if we had the money to spend, we could spend it and bring in some bigger players. But under that system, you wouldn't be able to. You wouldn't be allowed to.
But it could be taken out of the league's hands. If this is one of the suggested measures of an independent football regulator, one of the recommendations of the interim fan-led review report produced by the government, then cost controls.
So, what's the solution? There certainly needs to be a wage and a transfer cap. But it's how you implement it. And I think that system they just demonstrated doesn't actually help the smaller clubs. It doesn't make it more even. And that is what you want. You want it to still be an even playing field. Not even even, but you need to be able to boost the smaller clubs to make the league more competitive. I think that's the biggest thing. You need to make the league more competitive for a fan side of things. Thinking that, okay, yes, Southampton could get into the Champions League. Arsenal, they could face relegation. It's just trying to even it out a little bit, but also take the financial pressure off some of these owners. Yeah, I understand they're billionaires, but I'm sure that money can certainly be denting their pockets sometimes, for sure. It's an interesting one. Let me know your thoughts. Have you got any ideas what they could do? Thanks for watching, guys. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.